Don't let toxic people use this depth psychology approach. Imagine you're walking through a room and you feel the air shift. Someone enters and suddenly the mood drops. You feel drained, irritated, uneasy. Maybe you didn't even catch a mean word, only that subtle pulling that heavy energy. That's the signature of a toxic person. And what if I told you the reason you feel it isn't only because they are toxic, but because you are being asked to awaken to something deeper within you? According to Carl Jung, toxic people aren't just external problems. They are mirrors of the parts of ourselves we refuse to see. They drag into the open what we've buried, projected, denied. If you keep getting drawn into the same kind of destructive relationships, the pattern isn't outside, it's inside. In this video, we're going beyond typical deal with toxic people advice. We'll use depth psychology to discover why they have power over you, how you unwittingly feed it, and most importantly, what you must become to take your power back once and for all. Stay with me for the next hour. By the end, you won't just know how to defend yourself, you'll know how to transform your inner world so that toxic people stop being entrances to your pain and become catalysts for your growth. Part 1. Understanding the hidden nature of toxic people, the shadow in them and in you. Carl Jung believed that every person carries a shadow, the unconscious part of the psyche that holds what we repress, deny, or project onto others. When you meet a toxic person, you are not only confronting their darkness, you're often coming face to face with your own unhealed shadow. This is why toxic people trigger you so deeply. They awaken something within you that demands awareness. Toxic individuals are not defined by occasional bad behavior, but by a consistent pattern of manipulation, emotional exploitation, and energetic drain. They are people who feed off others' insecurities, guilt, or empathy to maintain control. But Jung would challenge us to look deeper. What attracts us to such people? Why do we stay entangled in their web long after recognizing the damage? The answer lies in the unconscious dynamics of projection and identification. When you project, you attribute your own repressed emotions or traits onto someone else. You see in them what you cannot accept in yourself. For example, if you secretly fear being selfish, you might attract someone who constantly takes from you because they embody your disowned quality. The toxic person mirrors your inner conflict. This dynamic forms an unconscious dance where both participants feed each other's shadows. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." That fate often appears in the form of a toxic relationship. There are several archetypal patterns that explain toxic behavior. One is the manipulator who uses guilt, shame, or fear to control others. They sense your emotional weak spots and exploit them subtly. Another is the victim who draws attention through suffering and helplessness, keeping others trapped in cycles of pity and rescue. Then there is the dominator, who exerts power to feel superior, feeding on submission and obedience. Finally, the envious shadow who cannot bear your light or success seeks to dim it through criticism or competition. Though their methods differ, the psychological root is the same: unconscious fear and insecurity projected outward. In Jungian terms, a toxic person has a disowned shadow that has taken control of their ego. They are not aware of their inner fragmentation, so they seek to regulate themselves by manipulating others. They create chaos because it makes them feel alive. They provoke reactions because that's how they confirm their existence. The moment you react emotionally to them, you become their mirror. You carry their pain for them. Jung saw this as a transfer of psychic energy. If you are not conscious of it, you will unconsciously absorb their poison. But Jung also emphasized that we are not innocent victims. The toxic person triggers what is already latent within us. If someone's criticism devastates you, it's not only because they are cruel, it's because there is a part of you that already doubts your worth. The toxic person simply activates that wound. In this sense, they serve as an unwilling teacher of self-awareness. By observing your emotional responses, you can trace them back to unresolved complexes, psychological knots formed in childhood, often around themes of rejection, guilt, or abandonment. One of the most powerful insights from Jungian psychology is that you attract what you unconsciously are. If you are overgiving, you will attract takers. If you suppress anger, you will attract people who express it for you. If you crave validation, you will attract those who withhold it. This is not cosmic punishment, but psychological balance, seeking integration. Life brings you mirrors, not enemies. Each toxic encounter is an invitation to reclaim a part of yourself. Jung also warned that the ego often resists recognizing its shadow because it threatens the persona, the social mask we wear to appear good, kind, or spiritual. The persona thrives on approval. When we meet someone toxic, the ego insists on maintaining that mask by being nice, understanding, or forgiving even when we are being drained. This is not compassion, it is avoidance. By refusing to confront darkness in others, we also refuse to confront it in ourselves. The shadow then grows stronger, and the cycle repeats. To deal wisely with toxic people, the first step is not to analyze them, but to observe yourself in their presence. Notice your emotional reactions without judgment. Does their manipulation awaken guilt? Does their arrogance stir anger or inferiority? These reactions are signals from your unconscious pointing to parts of you that crave attention. Jung called this shadow work the process of bringing unconscious material into consciousness. When you see clearly what is being triggered, you take back your power. The toxic person loses influence the moment you stop feeding them emotional energy. It's also essential to recognize that toxic people are often unconscious of their behavior. They are driven by wounded archetypes. For example, the manipulator may have learned as a child that control was the only way to avoid abandonment. The victim may have been rewarded with love only when suffering. The dominator may have internalized the belief that power equals safety. Understanding this does not mean excusing their behavior. It means you no longer personalize it. Their toxicity is not about you. It is a reflection of their unhealed psyche. Jung's concept of psychological projection is crucial here. When a toxic person accuses you of being selfish, cold, or ungrateful, they are projecting their own repressed qualities onto you. Recognizing this helps you detach. Instead of defending yourself, you can silently think, "This is their shadow speaking." By doing so, you break the unconscious identification. You step out of their psychic field. Another key insight is that toxic energy can only attach where there is emotional resonance. If you are internally stable, you become psychologically non-stick. Jung would describe this as strengthening the ego self-axis, the connection between your conscious mind and your higher self. When this link is strong, external negativity cannot penetrate easily. You sense toxicity without absorbing it. From a Jungian standpoint, the goal is not to eliminate toxic people, but to integrate the lesson they represent. Each encounter with darkness offers a chance for individuation, the process of becoming whole. The toxic person exposes what you still need to heal. Once you integrate that, the same pattern will no longer appear in your life. Jung compared this to alchemy, transforming lead shadow into gold consciousness. The people who once drained you become irrelevant because they no longer resonate with your frequency. To identify your shadow triggers, reflect on recurring patterns. Do you often feel taken advantage of? Do you attract narcissistic personalities? Do you keep giving second chances? These are not coincidences. They are symbolic messages from the unconscious. Jung taught that the psyche communicates through repetition until the message is understood. When you decode the message, the repetition stops. An effective Jungian exercise is to imagine the toxic person as an archetype, not an individual. For instance, if you are dealing with a manipulative boss, visualize them as the trickster. What does this archetype teach you? Perhaps it reveals your fear of authority or your hidden desire to please. Seeing people symbolically creates psychological distance. You stop personalizing the pain and start analyzing the pattern. This shift from emotional reaction to symbolic understanding is the essence of Jungian intelligence. It's also important to differentiate between discernment and judgment. Jung never advocated blind positivity or naive forgiveness. He believed in conscious awareness. Discernment means recognizing darkness without hatred. It's the ability to say, "I see your shadow, but I will not let it merge with mine." This inner stance transforms interactions. The toxic person senses that you are no longer a suitable host for their projection. They will either change their behavior or drift away naturally. Ultimately, the smartest way to deal with toxic people begins within. When you bring awareness to your own shadow, you stop feeding theirs. When you honor your boundaries, you cease being a mirror for their pain. Jung wrote that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. In this context, toxic people are dark mirrors reflecting your inner work. They force you to confront what you would rather ignore: your fears, needs, and illusions. As you practice this level of awareness, you begin to sense toxicity not through words, but through energy. You recognize when someone's presence tightens your body, when conversations leave you drained, or when guilt becomes their currency. Instead of reacting, you quietly step back into your center. You realize you are not responsible for fixing, saving, or understanding everyone. You are responsible only for maintaining your own consciousness. Dealing with toxic people, therefore, is not about strategies or confrontation. It's about transformation. You learn to view every negative encounter as psychological material to integrate. You no longer see yourself as a victim, but as an observer of archetypal dynamics. This shift marks the beginning of individuation, the journey toward wholeness. The shadow of others can only control you when your own shadow remains unconscious. Once you illuminate it, you become immune to manipulation. Toxic people may still exist, but they will no longer exist within you. Part 2: Why you can't cut them off. The interplay between persona and shadow. If Part 1 reveals that toxic people mirror our inner wounds, then Part 2 explores the deeper reason why, even after recognizing them, we still struggle to let them go. This is not simply about emotional weakness or attachment. From a Jungian perspective, it's about the collision between two psychological forces within us, the persona and the shadow. Carl Jung described the persona as the social mask we wear to function in the world. It's the image we want others to see, our ideal self. For many, this persona is built around being kind, loyal, forgiving, or selfless. But beneath that polished exterior lies the shadow, the part of us that holds repressed anger, resentment, fear, or desire for power. When we meet toxic people, these two forces clash. The persona tells us to keep being good and understanding, while the shadow demands justice and boundaries. This internal split traps us in confusion, guilt, and indecision. The hidden addiction to being the good person. Many people unconsciously maintain toxic relationships because their persona is addicted to being seen as good. The thought of setting boundaries feels selfish. Saying no feels cruel. Distancing from someone manipulative feels like betrayal. This is not moral strength, it's psychological conditioning. Jung would call it a form of ego identification. The ego clings to the identity of the savior, the empath, or the loyal friend because it fears rejection if that mask is removed. The deeper truth is that your attachment to toxic people often serves your own unconscious needs. You might stay because the relationship validates your identity as the helper. It gives you a sense of purpose. The manipulator needs control, but the empath often needs to feel needed. This mutual dependency, though painful, is psychologically satisfying to both egos. Jung observed that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. Unfortunately, in toxic dynamics, one person's transformation often comes at the cost of the other's energy. The empath-narcissist dynamic illustrates this perfectly. The empath gives endlessly, hoping love will heal the narcissist. The narcissist takes endlessly, feeding off that hope. The empath feels virtuous for enduring pain, while the narcissist feels powerful for receiving devotion. Both are trapped in illusion, the illusion that endurance equals love and control equals strength. Jung would call this a neurotic complex born from childhood conditioning. Somewhere in your past you learned that love means sacrifice. You learned that if you keep giving, you'll finally be seen. And so unconsciously you replay that story with every toxic person who crosses your path. The codependency trap and the false self. In analytical psychology, codependency can be seen as a fusion of persona and shadow. Your persona insists on being the caretaker while your shadow secretly resents it. This creates an internal war that keeps you emotionally bound to the toxic person. You alternate between compassion and bitterness, loyalty and rage. You might even find yourself thinking, "Why can't I stop caring?" The truth is, part of you doesn't want to. That part still believes that healing them will prove your worth. Jung described this as identification with the false self. You mistake self-sacrifice for virtue, when in reality it's a defense mechanism to avoid your own shadow feelings, anger, fear, loneliness. Every time you rescue someone who drains you, you are rescuing the wounded child within yourself who once felt powerless to say no. The toxic relationship is not just a battle between two people, it's a reenactment of an ancient wound inside you. Your psyche, according to Jung, seeks wholeness through repetition. You attract the same emotional pattern until it becomes conscious. The moment you see that the relationship is not about them, but about you, transformation begins. You realize that cutting them off isn't about punishing them, it's about integrating the parts of yourself that made their presence necessary. The savior complex, a mask of control. Another Jungian pattern that keeps you tied to toxic people is the savior complex. You tell yourself you're staying because you care, but unconsciously you're staying to maintain control. Helping becomes a way to feel superior, to avoid your own helplessness. Jung wrote that helping others can sometimes be a disguised form of power. You try to heal others not out of pure compassion, but because their brokenness makes you feel valuable. The toxic person senses this and exploits it. They give you just enough drama to keep your ego engaged, and you mistake emotional chaos for depth. To break this cycle, you must confront the shadow aspect of your own goodness. Ask yourself, who would I be if I stopped fixing people? Would I still feel worthy? Would I still know who I am? This is the core question of individuation. The persona dies a little when you stop playing the hero, but in that death, your authentic self begins to live. Why boundaries feel so unnatural? One of the most painful truths Jung helps us face is that setting boundaries feels wrong when you've built your identity on self-denial. The first time you say no, your body shakes. Guilt floods your system. You fear being seen as cold, unkind, or unspiritual. But this discomfort is not proof that you're doing something bad, it's proof that you're breaking the old psychic pattern. The toxic person will often sense this shift and escalate. They might accuse you of being selfish or heartless, using your persona against you. This is why the Jungian approach emphasizes awareness over reaction. Instead of defending yourself, you observe, this is my shadow test. The more conscious you become of this manipulation, the less power it holds. Remember, toxic people do not fear your anger, they fear your indifference. As long as you are emotionally reactive, you remain bound. But when you become neutral, when you no longer need to prove or explain yourself, their energy cannot reach you. This is not coldness, it's psychological maturity. The inner marriage reconciling persona and Shadow Jung often spoke of the need to marry opposites within the psyche to integrate light and dark, strength and vulnerability. Dealing with toxic people is one of the greatest initiations into this inner marriage. The more you integrate your shadow, your suppressed anger, assertiveness, or self-respect, the less you need external villains to express it for you. For example, if you repress your own aggression, life will send you people who embody it. They will dominate, insult, or manipulate you until you learn to embody your own power. Once you do, those people either change or disappear. This is not magic, it's energetic psychology. When your inner polarity balances, the outer world reflects that harmony. Jung called this process individuation, the journey toward becoming whole rather than perfect. The toxic person, therefore, becomes an archetypal teacher. They force you to awaken your inner warrior, to face the parts of yourself you've long denied. You learn that compassion without boundaries is self-betrayal. You learn that love is not proven through suffering. You learn that detachment is not cruelty, it's wisdom. Breaking the psychic contract. Every toxic relationship operates under a psychic contract, an unspoken agreement between two unconscious minds. One promises to play the role of victim, the other the savior. One provides chaos, the other provides order. To end the cycle, you must consciously break the contract. This begins with awareness. What role am I playing? What am I getting from this dynamic? It might be attention, validation, or even a sense of identity. Once you see it clearly, you can reclaim your energy. Jung said that no tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. Facing the dark truth about your motives is the descent that precedes liberation. Breaking the contract means refusing to feed the dynamic. You stop explaining yourself, stop rescuing, stop reacting. The toxic person may spiral, accuse, or plead, but you no longer play your part. This is not emotional detachment. It's psychological differentiation. You are no longer an extension of their psyche, the gift hidden in the pain. Though it may sound paradoxical, Jung would say that every toxic relationship contains a sacred gift. It exposes your false self so that your true self can emerge. It teaches you that your worth is not determined by how much you endure, but by how deeply you know yourself. The suffering becomes meaningful when it leads to consciousness. Once you integrate the lesson, the attraction fades. What once felt magnetic now feels heavy. You stop resonating with manipulation because your frequency has changed. You no longer crave chaos because you have met the part of you that once needed it. When persona and shadow are reconciled, you achieve what Jung called psychological wholeness. You can interact with darkness without being consumed by it. You can say no without guilt, love without losing yourself, and walk away without hatred. You realize that dealing with toxic people was never about them. It was always about coming home to your own integrity, and that Jung would say is the real alchemy, turning the poison of relationships into the gold of self-knowledge. Part 3. Jungian strategies detoxing the mind through awareness and neutral energy. Dealing with toxic people is not about learning clever comebacks or cutting them off with drama. Jungian psychology teaches that the real mastery lies in inner alchemy, transforming the poison they project into psychological insight. The way to do that is not by fighting their darkness, but by holding your light in a stable, neutral awareness. In this part, we move from understanding to practice how to detach, without disconnecting from your humanity, how to protect your energy without closing your heart, and how to transform every encounter with toxicity into a step toward individuation. 1. The power of conscious observation. Jung taught that consciousness dissolves possession. When you are fully aware of what's happening inside you, no toxic person can possess your emotions or manipulate your state. Imagine this: someone insults you, mocks your values, or tries to provoke guilt. The untrained mind reacts instantly, defending, explaining, or overanalyzing. But the Jungian mind observes. It notices the rise of heat in the chest, the tightening in the stomach, the urge to speak. Then it silently says, this is my ego, wanting to be right. This is my shadow, reacting to being disrespected. That moment of awareness breaks the psychic loop. The energy that would have been drained in reaction is now reclaimed as consciousness. Jung believed that every conflict, whether internal or external, is a call to awareness. When you witness your emotions without identifying with them, you begin the process of psychic detox. Observation doesn't mean passivity, it's an act of power. Because awareness changes the energetic balance. Toxic people thrive in chaos and unconsciousness. When you refuse to feed that, their influence dissolves. 2. The law of psychological resonance. Jung's theory of synchronicity and psychic energy explains why you often absorb the energy of toxic people. Every interaction is an exchange of psychic frequency. When you are unconscious of your emotional boundaries, your energy field becomes porous and you absorb other people's projections. The solution is not isolation, it's resonance management. You must learn to keep your vibration neutral. That doesn't mean suppressing emotion, but remaining centered regardless of external turbulence. When someone speaks with anger, you don't need to match their vibration. You can remain in quiet observation. When someone tries to guilt trip you, you can pause, breathe, and mentally say, I return this energy to its source. This inner detachment doesn't require words. It's energetic hygiene. The toxic person loses access to your psyche when you no longer resonate with their drama. Jung called this psychological differentiation the process of separating what belongs to you from what belongs to others. The more differentiated you are, the less reactive you become. 3. The art of neutral energy. Neutral energy is not emotionless, it's balanced. It's the energy of someone who has met their shadow and made peace with it. Toxic people feed off polarity, love and hate, approval and rejection, victim and rescuer. They need emotional extremes to survive. Neutrality therefore starves them of psychic food. Jung said, what you resist persists. The more you hate a toxic person, the more psychic energy you invest in them. You are still bound by the same cord, just on the opposite pole. The antidote is neutrality, neither love nor hate, simply understanding. Think of it like standing in a storm without fighting the wind. You observe it pass. You recognize that their words or actions are not personal but archetypal. They represent their own inner demons. By refusing to personalize their behavior, you prevent that energy from entering your emotional body. Neutrality does not mean staying in harm's way. It means leaving without inner conflict. You can walk away calmly without resentment. That is the difference between escaping and evolving. 4. Shadow integration as protection. Most people try to defend themselves from toxicity by avoiding negative people. But Jung's wisdom was deeper. You protect yourself not by isolation but by integration. When you integrate your own shadow, your anger, assertiveness, selfishness, pride, you no longer need someone else to play that role for you. The toxic archetypes lose their hooks because you've reclaimed your inner power. For example, if you repress your anger, you will constantly attract people who express it for you, bullies, narcissists, critics. But once you accept that anger is a natural boundary-setting emotion, you no longer need external villains to trigger it. You can say no firmly and calmly. That's psychological maturity. Integration work can be done through journaling, active imagination, one of Jung's methods, or self-inquiry. When you feel triggered, ask, what part of me is reacting? What am I trying not to feel right now? What does this person mirror about my own unresolved fear or need? Each honest answer pulls another projection back into consciousness. Over time, your shadow becomes your ally rather than your enemy. 5. The individuation process, becoming whole, not perfect. The ultimate goal of Jungian psychology is individuation, the process of becoming your whole self. Dealing with toxic people is part of that initiation. They expose the places where your self-concept is still fragile, where your boundaries are still negotiable, where your love still hides fear. Individuation requires confronting both the light and dark within you. It means learning that your worth is not defined by external validation. Jung taught that the self, the divine center of your being, does not need to prove or defend itself. When you live from that center, toxic people lose their grip because they can no longer disturb your sense of identity. Individuation transforms relationships from battlegrounds into classrooms. Each toxic encounter becomes material for self-realization. You begin to thank the very people who once drained you, not because you approve of them, but because they accelerated your evolution. 6. Practices for psychological detox. To embody these principles, here are Jungian-inspired exercises that help you neutralize toxic energy and strengthen your self-one. Shadow journaling. Each time you feel emotionally drained, write down, who triggered me? What emotion did I feel? When did I first feel this emotion in life? Patterns will emerge. You'll see that most toxic triggers connect to early wounds. Awareness breaks the repetition. 2. Disidentification, meditation. Sit quietly and repeat internally. I have thoughts, but I am not my thoughts. I have emotions, but I am not my emotions. I have relationships, but I am not defined by them. This separates your consciousness from the drama. It reclaims your inner sovereignty. 3. Energetic grounding. Visualize roots growing from your feet deep into the earth. Imagine releasing all heavy borrowed emotions into the ground. Then inhale light through the crown of your head. This simple practice resets your energetic field. 4. Archetype visualization. When you face a toxic person, imagine them as an archetype, the trickster, the victim, the controller. This helps depersonalize the dynamic. You see patterns instead of villains, and your emotional charge decreases. 7. Detachment versus indifference. Jung warned that spiritual bypassing, the act of pretending to be above it all, is another ego trick. True detachment is not indifference, it's compassion without enmeshment. You still recognize the humanity in others, but you no longer confuse their pain with your responsibility. The difference is energetic. Indifference says, I don't care. Detachment says, I care, but I choose peace over control. When you reach this state, toxic people can no longer use guilt or pity to manipulate you. You see through their games with gentle clarity. You don't need to expose them or prove anything. Your peace is your boundary. 8. The silence that heals. Jung once noted that silence is not emptiness, it's fullness. It's where the self speaks. When you stop reacting, explaining, and defending, silence becomes your protection. Toxic people often fear silence because it forces them to face their own emptiness. They thrive on your engagement. When you withdraw that energy not through punishment but through calm stillness, you mirror their chaos back to them without absorbing it. This is psychological aikido, using their own energy to neutralize the impact. Your silence says, I see you, but I do not enter your storm. It is the most powerful act of spiritual strength. 9. Alchemy of the soul. When you learn to transmute negativity into insight, you are practicing the alchemy Jung admired so deeply. In medieval alchemy, lead symbolized the raw dark matter of the soul, pain, anger, jealousy. Gold represented consciousness, wisdom, and integration. The alchemist's task was to transform one into the other. In modern psychological terms, toxic encounters are your lead. They feel heavy and unpleasant, but they contain potential gold, the awareness that frees you from unconscious patterns. The key is to stop running from discomfort and start decoding its message. Each time you face toxicity without reacting, you refine your inner gold. You strengthen your connection to the self, the unshakable center of your being. 10. The birth of emotional sovereignty. At the end of this process, you no longer need external validation to feel safe. You no longer chase harmony with those who thrive in chaos. You stand in your truth, calm and grounded, even when surrounded by darkness. This is what Jung meant when he said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." When you become that person, conscious, balanced, and whole, no toxic individual can dominate you. Their words may echo, but they won't enter. Their energy may reach, but it won't attach. You are free not because the world has changed, but because you have. Part 4. When you overcome them, the rebirth of the free soul self. When you finally transcend the power of toxic people, what happens inside you is not simply peace, it's psychological rebirth. You emerge from the battlefield of manipulation, guilt, and projection as someone new, someone whole. Carl Jung called this the emergence of the self, the unshakable center of your being that stands beyond all masks, wounds, and conditioning. This part explores what it feels like when you have fully integrated the lessons of toxicity, the psychological transformation that follows individuation, and how your inner world, relationships, and energy begin to shift once you are free from unconscious entanglement. 1. The death of the old identity. Jung said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain. The moment you break free from toxic patterns, you undergo a symbolic death. The old you, the version that tolerated disrespect, feared rejection, or needed to please, dissolves. That identity was built around survival. It existed to avoid abandonment, to earn love, to maintain control. When you finally set boundaries and honor your worth, that old self feels threatened. It fears annihilation because its existence was tied to external validation. You may feel emptiness at first, a strange silence where chaos once lived. This silence is sacred. It is the void before creation, the psychological womb where your authentic self begins to form. In this stage, loneliness may visit you. Jung believed loneliness is not the absence of people, but the inability to communicate what is most important to you. You may find that those who thrived on your old energy no longer resonate with you. They will drift away not because you reject them, but because your vibration no longer feeds their shadow. This is the price of individuation, the courage to lose the world to find your soul. 2. The integration of light and shadow freedom is not achieved by denying darkness. It is achieved by integrating it. Once you accept that both light and shadow live within you, you no longer project them outward. The people who once triggered you become mirrors that you no longer need. When Jung spoke of individuation, he meant the process of uniting opposites, the conscious and unconscious, love and power, kindness and assertiveness. You stop seeing yourself as good or bad. You become whole. The toxic people who once manipulated you lose their power because they can no longer exploit your unacknowledged traits. For example, when you integrate your assertiveness, no one can guilt-trip you for saying no. When you accept your right to anger, no one can use your fear of conflict to control you. When you embrace your own worth, flattery and criticism become equally irrelevant. Integration is psychological sovereignty. You no longer swing between victimhood and superiority. You stand in inner balance. Jung called this the middle way of the self. 3. The alchemical transformation of pain. Every encounter with toxicity carries a hidden gift, the chance to transmute pain into wisdom. Just as alchemists sought to turn lead into gold, you have turned suffering into consciousness. You've learned that the emotions that once overwhelmed you, anger, sadness, betrayal, are not enemies but messengers. They guided you towards self-knowledge. The difference between a wounded person and a healed one is not that the healed person never feels pain, it's that they understand its language. You begin to see pain as information, not identity. You no longer say they hurt me. You say that experience revealed where I needed healing. This is the essence of Jungian alchemy, the transformation of psychic energy. Every emotion you face consciously releases the energy that was trapped in repression. That liberated energy becomes creativity, intuition, and insight. Over time, your soul feels lighter, not because the world has changed, but because you have metabolized its darkness into light. 4. The rise of the authentic self. Once the shadow is integrated, the self begins to shine. Jung described the self as the organizing principle of the psyche, the divine core that holds balance between all opposites. It's not the ego, it's what the ego orbits around when it's healthy. You begin to live with a quiet confidence that doesn't depend on others' approval. You express yourself without fear of judgment. You no longer seek to prove your worth because your worth feels self-evident. Relationships transform. You attract people who mirror your growth instead of your wounds. Conversations become more honest connections, more reciprocal. You don't chase or control, you allow. You recognize that love flows freely when not bound by need. From a Jungian view, this is the moment the ego becomes the servant of the self rather than its master. You are guided not by fear or craving, but by inner alignment. 5. The new relationship with others. As you evolve, your way of relating to others changes profoundly. You no longer divide people into good and bad, toxic and pure. You see everyone as a mixture of consciousness and unconsciousness, just like yourself. This awareness brings compassion without attachment. When you meet someone manipulative, you don't demonize them, you recognize the shadow pattern they're acting out. You may choose to keep your distance, but you do so without hatred. Your boundaries become an act of love for yourself and for them because you no longer enable their unconsciousness. This is what Jung called the compassion of awareness. It's not sentimental. It's fierce love rooted in truth. You stop rescuing others because you know that growth comes through facing one's own darkness. You stop explaining yourself because you know that understanding is an inside job. You realize that your role is not to fix others, but to embody consciousness in their presence. 6. Signs of soul freedom. You know you've reached the threshold of freedom when your nervous system no longer flares up in the presence of toxicity. You may still notice manipulation, but it doesn't enter your body. You observe calmly, almost as if watching a play. Your emotions move through you instead of against you. Guilt turns into empathy, anger into clarity, sadness into wisdom. You are emotionally agile rather than reactive. Jung said, "The soul becomes a slave when it identifies with the ego, and it becomes free when it identifies with the self." When you are anchored in the self, no one can define your worth, redirect your peace, or pull you back into chaos. You move through life with quiet strength. You are not immune to pain, but you are immune to manipulation. 7. The spiritual dimension of individuation. Jung saw the individuation process not just as psychological but as spiritual. He believed that integrating the shadow awakens the divine within the imago Dei, or image of God in the soul. In this state, forgiveness arises naturally, not as a moral duty but as a spiritual understanding. You realize that those who hurt you were unconscious instruments of your awakening. You see how their darkness guided you toward your own light. Forgiveness then is not approval, it's liberation. You release them because you no longer need the story. You've outgrown it. This realization marks the transition from psychological healing to spiritual awakening. You begin to sense the sacredness of your entire journey. The pain, the confusion, the endings, all of it was necessary for your evolution. 8. The return of creative energy. Once you are free from psychic entanglement, your creative energy flows again. The same energy that was once consumed by survival and emotional management is now available for creation. You may feel drawn to art, writing, nature, or teaching. You may feel compelled to share your story not as a wound but as wisdom. This is the natural outcome of Jung's principle of psychic compensation. The energy once trapped in shadow becomes fuel for purpose. You no longer see creativity as a luxury, but as a necessity of the soul. You understand that expressing truth keeps your energy clean. Toxic relationships once drained your life force. Now authenticity replenishes it. You create not to prove, but to express the fullness of being. 9. The circle completes. The moment you stop seeing yourself as a victim of toxic people, the circle of transformation completes. What once felt like punishment now feels like preparation. You see how every betrayal taught boundaries, every manipulation taught discernment, and every disappointment purified your intentions. Jung wrote, "The goal is not to be good, but to be whole." Wholeness means accepting every part of your story, the victim, the survivor, the healer, the warrior. Nothing is wasted. The self integrates all of it into a coherent meaning. You realize that the people who broke you were not destroyers, but catalysts. Without them, you would never have descended into your unconscious to retrieve your power. And now that you have it, you no longer fear the darkness. You have walked through it and found light waiting at the center. 10. Living as the self, the new way of being. Freedom from toxicity doesn't mean living in isolation. It means living consciously. You move through the world differently. You speak less, but your words carry weight. You love deeply, but without attachment. You give freely, but without depletion. You forgive, but you do not forget the lesson. You begin to embody what Jung called the individuated human, someone who has become an instrument of consciousness. Your presence heals without trying. Your calm disrupts manipulation. Your silence exposes deceit. The toxic energy that once frightened you now feels small, almost fragile compared to your inner stillness. You don't fight darkness anymore. You illuminate it by being whole. And that is the ultimate victory, not revenge, not superiority, but freedom. Final reflection without conclusion, only insight. When you reach this stage, you realize that the smartest way to deal with toxic people was never about them at all. It was about reclaiming yourself. Every projection withdrawn, every shadow integrated, every boundary honored brought you closer to the divine center within. The war is over not because the world changed, but because your consciousness did. You are no longer reacting to life. You are creating it. That is the Jungian definition of freedom, to live as a whole soul in an imperfect world, untouched by poison, radiant in truth. You don't win by proving anything to toxic people. You win by no longer needing to prove anything at all. The moment you stop reacting, the moment you see the pattern and say, "I choose peace over chaos," you have already broken the cycle. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Today you made part of it conscious. You saw the shadow in them and in yourself, and you didn't run. That's power. Remember, you are not here to fix others. You are here to know yourself. The smarter you become, the calmer you are. The calmer you are, the freer you feel. If this message spoke to your soul, don't forget to like the video, share it with someone who needs this reminder, and subscribe for more Jungian wisdom and deep soul psychology. I'll see you in the next journey where we go even deeper into the human mind and into the light that lives behind the shadow.